Questions? Really interesting. I have a question.
Yeah.
So obviously some level of dumping TCP sessions is inevitable.
Yeah.
And that's a conversation that you mentioned, I think, that you had with your application team.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about how that target gets set sort of practically in the conversation with the apps team.
Sorry, can you repeat that last bit?
How does that, how does the acceptable interval between TCP resets kind of get set?
So when we talked to our application teams, we found that they'd actually already conducted this testing in terms of how they were writing their applications. And they've actually got a degree of testing on this in their unit tests when they're pushing out releases. Because for them, they were already very aware that being on the internet, this was going to happen. So what they had come to is that they were expecting one TCP reset every 60 seconds and optimizing their code for that. Now this is actually kind of hilarious to me, as I saw you just laughed as well, because I'd actually expected that they would be far more sensitive to this. But in our case at least, because we're streaming so much video ahead when we're streaming video, we're creating enough buffer in there in most cases that we can actually accept about a 5-second blip in connectivity and the user won't notice. So for our application stack, Periscope, which is live video streaming, was the most sensitive. And we found that with Periscope, we're actually lagging slightly behind where the user is at in order that we can buffer enough to deal with these events on the internet. Because from our perspective, the biggest offender is actually cellular networks. And if you're on a cellular network, a 2G network in the middle of rural India, then you're going to have to deal with the fact that it's going to drop out regularly. But yeah, really good question.
Hello, I have another question for you. Do you have any plans about building your own routers based on open compute projects to support your needs?
Sorry, could you repeat that? I didn't quite catch it.
Do you have any plans to build your own router based on open compute like things to support your needs?
So that's a really interesting one. We, like many, are definitely looking at this extensively in our data centers. And data center is a much simpler problem to solve in many ways. In that in a data center you have a relatively hierarchical and structured method of networking, and you can be relatively deterministic about where you route your traffic. Backbone is really interesting and complex in that A, you have a huge scale of routing information. So internet table is over 500,000 prefixes now. But B, you have unequal amounts of capacity everywhere. So our perspective at this point is that while data center is something we're aggressively pursuing, Backbone is an area we have to accept having a vendor and having a black box. So from our perspective, we're trying to get as much information out of that black box to stream as many metrics as possible to be able to understand it, but we don't yet believe we will be able to develop that for ourselves.
I ask this because you can join the Open Compute project to build your own routers in order to support your needs, because some other companies, other web-based companies began to do these projects.
Yeah.
So for your infrastructure, I think you don't need any vendor to sell those equipments to you. You don't have to wait.
Yeah, I mean, so other companies definitely have looked into this. I'm only aware of one company that has managed to build a commodity hardware backbone. But I mean, our biggest thing there in terms of getting, if I understand your question, it's, how do we get features prioritized, etc. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, a really good relationship with our vendors is really important. And ensuring that we keep our vendors competitive and I guess aware that they're replaceable if needed is really important there. But I think ultimately having a great relationship with your vendor and working with them to develop features that other customers will use has been a really advantageous position for us. And we are fortunate enough to be of a scale whereby we are developing these features with our vendors and working on a couple of standards around how these will look with our vendors that we hope other people can benefit from. Because we're really aware that not everyone has the level of leverage that Twitter or LinkedIn or Facebook or Google might have with their vendors.